One of the big stories this week as we get closer to the election, of course, we're keeping an eye out for so-called October surprises. And this week, John Kelly, who was White House Chief of Staff during the Trump administration, said in a series of interviews that former President Trump spoke positively about Adolf Hitler while in office and has warned that Donald Trump could be a fascist. This guy was also there, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, former U.S. National Security Advisor to the President and Vice President, author of the book War by Other Means, a general in the Trump White House. General, it's great to have you back on the Scott Sands Show.
Hey, Scott, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
As your book suggests, you were a general in the Trump White House. What did you hear the former president say with regards to the military and his generals and Adolf Hitler, if anything?
Well, I sure didn't hear that. I mean, even Mark Esper, the former Secretary of Defense, said he'd never heard anything like that either. I never heard anything like that. You know, and it's really disappointing when you have somebody like Kelly say that. I think it's very irresponsible for him to say things like that. You know, here's the thing the problems you run into, and I'm really disappointed in Kelly and people like that. We've all been involved in discussions, talks. You sit around and you talk, and I'm sure you sit around with your feet up on the desk or on the chair, and you talk about things, and something you go, it's a pretty stupid comment I just talked about. Well, things like that happen actually in the White House, and most of the times they're kind of just off the cuff discussions. It happens all the time. So you get somebody like that saying something like that where he could have totally misinterpreted something like that or said something like that. But I will tell you, I never heard Trump say something like that. I had never heard him disrespect the military at all. He went out of his way to prop up and support the military. In fact, I'll tell you, here's an interesting thing happened early on in the White House. We brought, at that time, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Joe Dunford, over, along with Mattis, and we were seated on, they actually had dinner, so it was about 6 of us. So as we were finishing the dinner, this was before Melania had come down from New York City, he said, let me take you a tour of the White House, the residence. I said, okay. So he took us up there, showed us the Lincoln bedroom and a lot of stuff like that, and walk out. And as we're walking out, Joe Dunford, the chairman, the 4-star Marine chairman of the Joint Chiefs, looked at me as we were walking down the colonnade and said, man, he really trusts and really believes in us. And I looked at Joe and I said, Joe, that's what really scares me. And he goes, huh? He said, the reason because he loves you guys so much as the military, he will bend over backwards and I'm always afraid he'll say something or do something that could be wrong because of his attitude toward it. That's the kind of guy he is. That's the kind of guy that I saw in the White House. So for Kelly to say stuff like that is really, really garbage. And it's really, really disappointing because I never saw it, never heard it, nothing like that. I've been to dignified transfers with him. I've been overseas with him. I've been to cemeteries with him. I've been when he's gone to Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, North Carolina, when he visited Delta Force, the top secret counterterror force. I've been with him all over the world, and I've never, ever seen him say something like that. That's what I'm so aggravated. That's what I commented on it in the Twitter account.
And I want to come back to the dignified transfers and some of the stories coming out of the encounter at Arlington National. Kamala Harris latching on to these comments from John Kelly, saying that it's deeply troubling and incredibly dangerous that Donald Trump would invoke Adolf Hitler, the man who was responsible for the deaths of 6 million Jews and hundreds of thousands of Americans. This is a window into who Donald Trump really is from the people who know him best, from the people who worked with him side by side in the Oval Office and in the Situation Room. It's about the worst insult that you could give somebody is to compare them to Adolf Hitler. But so many people have been doing that to Donald Trump for the last 8 years that it almost has lost any meaning.
Yeah, hey, Scott, let's be really clear to make sure, because maybe some of your listeners don't know this. Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, is Jewish. Ivanka Trump converted to Judaism, his daughter. His 3 grandchildren by them are Jewish. He took the American embassy and moved it from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to support the Israelis. I mean, really? Do you really believe garbage like that when you look at what he's done and what his family has done as well? And you look at, his relations with others. Tiffany, his youngest daughter, married somebody who's a Lebanese American. I mean, you go back and said, do you really understand this person? Do you really know, or is it just a knee-jerk reaction and being stupid? And I think it's the latter by a lot of people, and that includes Vice President Kamala Harris. I mean, this is somebody has reached a point where she's beyond foolish. I mean, it's almost. Here's what's scary. She's scary to me because she is an empty suit, and that is strong. Yep. Is it partisan? You better believe it. But I've seen her in action.
Well, and what's just as scary is we really don't know who's running the country right now in the absence of Joe Biden and the ineffective leadership of Kamala Harris over the last 4 years. We're talking to General Keith Kellogg, former National Security Advisor, author of the book War by Other Means, a General in the Trump White House. In response to John Kelly's comments that have apparently leaked, Donald Trump calling John Kelly a lowlife. Apparently, there was perhaps a lot of tension between John Kelly and Donald Trump in the White House during his time as chief of staff. What was your impression of Kelly in the White House?
Yeah, look, I remember when John Kelly came from DHS, and I went up to Bedminster, and I sat down with him, and I said, hey, look, I've been with President Trump since 2015. Let me just give you, because you don't know him as a person, and I've been with him for a long time. Let me just kind of give you some insights just in case. He blew me off. I said, fine. And I said, uh-oh, this is going to be a problem. And it turned out to be a problem because he actually ran the chief of staff like he had gotten electoral college votes. And I reminded him, John, you didn't get any electoral college votes. The guy who got the electoral college votes is sitting in the Oval Office and just down the hall here in the White House, in the West Wing, with Mike Pence. I said, you didn't get any. And then when you tried to restrict people, which he did, and I don't want to drop names on it, but he tried to restrict some people with an open door policy to the president. I said, this is a losing battle because in the White House under President Trump, if you were an assistant to the president, they call them APs. There were 3 levels of commission: assistant to the president, deputy assistant to the president, and senior president, assistant to the president. But the APs had open door privilege. You could walk in. They call them walk-in privileges. And he tried to restrict that with certain people that you can kind of imagine who I'm talking about that was sitting there. I said, you can't do that, John. That is not going to happen with him. And he tried to run it that way. And I knew this was a train wreck waiting to happen.
Look, all I know is I was locked out of the Oval Office for 4 years. I was never allowed to walk in once.
Well, this was what happened. And I said, okay. And so what happened is he did things like that. And I said, you got to let President Trump be President Trump. He won the White House. He runs it, not you. And by the way, Scott, he wasn't the only one like that. There were others that kind of took on the air of importance, that they had won electoral college votes and they were therefore important. And that's the reason why President Trump got rid of some of those people. And it was good for the American people that he did that because they were not elected officers. There's a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who, honest to God, believe they've been elected to do the job they're doing, and they're not. There's only 2 in the executive branch. One's the president and one's the vice president. And I see that.
We've heard the stories that sometimes the last person to get Donald Trump's ear is the opinion, is the voice that he goes with. So that may have been John Kelly's objective, was to keep some extreme voices out of the White House, out of the Oval Office. But instead, I'm not sure Donald Trump was ever able to get a clear picture and all of the information he would need to make decisions. And it sounds like oftentimes John Kelly disagreed with those decisions.
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody disagrees with sometimes decisions that are made by senior people, but that you don't get a vote on that. I'm from the West. And there's a term in Western lore, you ride for the brand. And that means, when you sign up for the rodeo for the team, you're now branded with that brand and you ride for it. And if you don't ride for it, then you leave. You go to another, to another outfit. And he didn't ride for the brand. And I think it was a big mistake by him, and there were others as well, and you did it. And one thing I will say, Scott, is I will tell you, I've said this before in other programs, is President Trump has always been very, very inclusive. What I mean by that, when he made decisions, I call it Socratic, going back to my Jesuit training when I came out of school, is that means he would go around the room and he'd talk to people and ask them their opinion. And that Socratic discussion, said he had an idea, said, what do you think? And it was a back and forth kind of deal. And that's how we used to make decisions. And I may have said this on your program before, but I'll never forget the first time we were ever in the Situation Room. We were actually talking about Afghanistan. And he went around the entire room, and there was a young woman sitting 2 seats to my left. And he looked at her and said, okay, what do you think about what we're talking about? She goes, Mr. President, I'm just a note taker. He goes, oh, no. You're in this room, you have an opinion. And he would do that. And I think it was very, very healthy for a nation that it would get the full range of options. And you always had a chance to weigh into them. Now, and you just don't go public. By the point, you don't go public. That's not, those discussions, those talks, when you went inside the Oval Office and you went into the back room or you in the Situation Room, those discussions with the President of the United States were kept between you and the President. That's what I mean about riding for the brand. He's the trail boss. I ride for the trail boss.
Yeah, it seems like the president is put at a disadvantage if these internal conversations and brainstorming sessions really ever become public. You would be afraid of your thought process along the way on how you reached a certain decision, and that's information you don't really want to get out, both for political but also national security reasons, to know what everybody is having a conversation about.
Yeah, in fact, one of those times, I tell you, this actually happened when we were talking about the Taliban. When we were talking to Afghanistan, talking with him, and we're sitting in the Situation Room, and this got out eventually, and I was really disappointed it did. But he said, why don't we bring the leadership, the Afghan leadership, Ghani, and the Taliban back to Camp David? I nearly fell out of my chair. I said, uh-oh, where are we going with this? But then he said, well, didn't we do this before with the Camp David Accords? I thought, uh-oh, I know where he's going. When he brought back Sadat of Egypt and Menachem Begin, who had been a known terrorist in Israel, and sat him up at Camp David and fed him warm beer and cold pizza for 7 days till he came out with something. I think he had an idea. Well, unfortunately, that got out. John Bolton actually said that. Oh, I can't believe you wanted to bring the Taliban back. And I told John I said, John, those are internal discussions. Those were discussions so the president could have a full range of options and we could all talk about it. And you go out and you tell people this would happen. And there were people who said, oh, I can't believe you want to bring the Taliban back to Camp David. They were talking about options. And this is how we would talk. But as long as those are kept quiet in-house, you can have those discussions. But when somebody talks about them, it kind of blows everything else. But they don't know their history. And I said, and he's basically school of us in history. Those are the kind of discussions that I think are important. Those are the kind of discussions we had. And I think that it allowed for full range of discussions. And then, so you've got people like, either Bolton saying things like that, or Kelly saying things that are just, brain dead, it just.
I think I know where you were going with that.
Yeah,
we're almost out of time
Family
here.
Program.
Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg here on the Scott Sand Show. Just quickly, General, in less than a minute or so, foreign policy is not at the top of the list of what voters are going in to vote for during this election season. It's not really one of the top 3 priorities, but oftentimes, if you look at what's happening around the world, maybe it should be. What's your biggest foreign policy concern heading into a new administration, whomever that may be?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to national security and foreign policy, and actually it's domestic, but it's also foreign, it's national security. That's our immigration system, which is broken, the flood of migrants, illegal migrants coming across the border. That's a national security issue because protecting your borders is national security. And I say that because that's so very, very important. Now, it's going to be a DHS issue, but we've got to solve that one. But then when you've solved that one, you've got a whole bunch of them sitting on the horizon right there that haven't been addressed, from the Middle East and Israel and Iran, which you've got in Europe with Ukraine and Russia, and now the North Koreans, according to the Pentagon now, providing 30,000 troops. Now they call them engineers. I remind everybody, in the American military, American Army engineers, their secondary duty is to fight as infantry. I said, okay, we've got that one. Then you've got what's happening with China. You've got the North Korea issue. You've got all of these issues, let alone what's happening in our own hemisphere. So these are enormous problems that have got to be solved in a near period of time, because they can all affect the quality of life and how we live as Americans. So his plate's going to be full, not only domestically but internationally, assuming, knock on wood, he wins the election in a little over a week.
Former National Security Advisor to Vice President Pence, President Trump, and now National Security Advisor, I guess, to the Scott Sand Show, which is quite a demotion. I'm sorry, General.
Thanks, God.
Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, his book is War by Other Means, a General in the Trump White House. If you haven't read it yet, get it now.